do you want to give listeners a sort of recap of what we did talk about?
Yeah, well, in the last interview, we were sort of looking at a lot of the symbolism of the film and some of the ideas that were being pushed. Obviously, as we discussed in the last interview, it's an extremely complex film with a lot going on. There's so many different layers of content, so many levels of interpretation. There's so many themes being all mixed in together into that film. So it's sort of it's difficult to sum up. But what we did is, obviously, people that have seen the movie, listened to our previous interview, was just concentrate on some of the more prominent symbolic facets of the film and the significance of those symbolic concepts. But I think today it would be interesting to talk about the correlation between Cloud Atlas and the themes that were included in Cloud Atlas and how they relate to basically our society today, and also how they relate to other films that have been put out by the Wachowskis and the common thread that seems to be running through all of the Wachowski films.
Yes, absolutely, because there is a point to this film, as people should note, and a greater point. So not only does this film kind of stand alone, but it ties into past Wachowski work. Is that correct?
I would say so, yeah. I believe that to be the case, yeah, definitely. I mean, we could go back to Cloud Atlas and talk about 1,000,001 little observations that, either one of us have made about the film. But, it wouldn't necessarily give the average listener or, even, other listeners any better idea of what we're particularly talking about here and what we're trying to get across in this series of interviews. So, I mean, I think talking about the correlation, would be the most important and significant factor in this discussion today, because there's a lot to be said about the continuity of these films and the ideas that the Wachowskis are trying to get across in all of their films.
Now, if you were to say there's a main idea to any Wachowski film and throughout all of them, what would that idea be?
I would sum it up by saying subjugation of people, the freeing of slaves, the idea of revolution and evolution, and some kind of birth of a new age, usually done, well, in all of their three main films, which we discussed last time, being The Matrix, V for Vendetta, and The Cloud Atlas. Basically, the slaves being freed by a hero, a kind of a messianic hero figure of some description, who has gone through some kind of personal awakening experience and has become a kind of a rebel against the system, who leads the population, the slaves, to freedom.
Okay, so we have a rebellion, the theme of rebellion, and you've coined the term Wachowski Rebellion Religion, right? Is that the term to use here?
Well, yeah, it's like we said in the last, Wachowski Rebellion Religion, Wachowski Revolutionary Religion, whichever fits really, because it's the same thing, at the end of the day. It's the same set of ideas which are being promoted. They often will zone in on minority groups, on the average worker, on the average citizen, on any group or individual who's being subjugated in one way, and will play on that issue. And the movie will always end in that person being freed in some way through the actions of some kind of messianic figure.
Now, what about revolution, just revolution on its own? It's kind of a term that I feel has been misunderstood and even abused in our time, because so many things are revolutionary. People describe products as being revolutionary, things like that. So what do you say about sort of that bastardization of the term, if that sounds right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in all the Wachowski films, the idea of revolution is it's always global in reach. It's always global in its significance. In The Matrix, it's basically humanity revolting against the machines, supposedly anyway. Of course, if you go into the high interpretations, it's actually quite the opposite. But we'll leave that for another discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
In V for Vendetta, you've got a similar scenario. Britain is supposedly the only, well, it's kind of presented to be the only functioning country left in the world, and so the revolution happens in Britain. And in Cloud Atlas, again, you're looking at a global revolution of some description that was instigated by a clone in future Korea. So yeah. It's always centered around the idea of one hero, one messiah, one special being leading us all to freedom. That is, and usually, for example, in Cloud Atlas, it's someone you would least expect. It's basically a clone, an automaton, a manufactured being who's not supposed to have any free will, ends up being the person that basically frees humanity and becomes a symbol for a new religion. Yeah. And the same thing with Neo. He was basically just an office worker who was unplugged from the Matrix, went through his personal waking up experience, and somehow through superpowers, which again would take a long time to go into in terms of interpretation of the Matrix, but leads humanity to some kind of truce or some kind of revolution. And that's, in fact, the name of the final Matrix film was Matrix Revolutions.
Yeah, that's right. Revolutions. Yeah, that's
right. The people finally become supposedly free from control and pursuit of the machines. Of course, if you look deeper into the Matrix, and if you look at the word revolution, it's basically just one cycle. And as the architect in the Matrix explains, basically what happens is they create a hero to inspire people toward revolution, at which point they arrive back at the same point, the system updates itself, and they start from scratch again, which is, in fact, the definitive term of what revolution is. It's a cycle.
Yeah. Now, do you think there's any historical revolutions that tie into these films, like actual events?
There could be many. I mean, some people would, might even say, look at the Bolshevik Revolution and somehow tie it in. But I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution is a very controversial subject. Some people believe it to be a genuine revolt of the peasants against the capitalist monarchy of Russia. Whereas, other evidence points to the fact that it was in fact a Western funded and basically Western organized event due to create another enemy for reasons, and also as a social experiment in math.
Well, yeah. Well, if that interpretation were correct, it leads to the global aspect of revolution, and you're saying that the Wachowskis in particular have a global view on revolution. Is that so?
It seems to be the case because the Wachowskis themselves, one of them has had a sex change and is now we get back to terminology again here. I mean, he would prefer to be a woman, whereas I'm not so sure that he really is a woman because he was born a man, and so I mean that's a whole other debate. And I think we could probably offend quite a few people if we went any further to that area. But I think, in terms of the idea of global revolution, is definitely something that is being suggested and sort of hinted at, and even quite blatantly promoted in some of their films. And this, of course, ties into the whole transhumanist, transgenderist idea as well, which is featured quite heavily in Cloud Atlas. The idea of the rebel movement called the Union, who want to free the clones so that the clones can, instead of being mindless automatons who are servant class, can integrate into society and be one with humanity. So it's the idea of freeing the slaves again. Yeah.
Well, when you talk about transhumanism and even transgenderism, postgenderism, all that stuff, those topics actually tie in together. People don't understand that they do. I would think, I would venture to say almost positively that the Wachowskis understand how those subjects connect. So it'd be my assumption that maybe they're playing to those themes and people don't even know it.
I believe so. I think the whole idea of the clone and the fact that one of them is also a now transgender person. I think those two particular facts definitely help to advance the idea of changing human nature, which is the core of transhumanism as a concept, supposedly improving the human being through science.
Yeah.
Again, it was basically, as you know very well yourself, a modern form of eugenics,
Yeah.
And I think that idea is played out in many of their films, especially in The Matrix and Cloud Atlas, although in different ways. So I think there's definite transhumanist spin in Cloud Atlas, and even more so in The Matrix, although in a different way.
Well, it's just how Aldous Huxley explained the ultimate revolution as one where, it's basically the transhumanist idea that he described in his book, Brave New World. And he said this overtly.
Yeah.
So now we're getting beyond his novel, his fiction. We're getting more fiction in that regard, in that vein, talking about the same things now.
Yeah. There's a whole ton of movies that have come out over the last couple of years, and even more so now. Some of the ones that are just coming out now are dealing very, very much with eugenics in a very Huxleyan fashion. Even the most recent Superman film. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I mean, that's there's a lot of Huxley in that.
Huh. I'll make a point to watch that. Yeah. I would say that the Matrix film is quite obviously dealing with transhumanist topics when you get the uploading into computers and all that. It's blatantly obvious. Yeah. But certainly not so much in Cloud Atlas. It's subtle, as everything in this movie is. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, in the Matrix, the only way to beat the system is to actually plug yourself into the system, into the control system. So it's kind of a a paradox right there, kind of conflict right there, and supposedly beating the system is becoming part of the system,
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, obviously that was brought out in the Matrix very heavily, whereas in Cloud Atlas, as you say, much more subtle. The themes are much more emotionally based. And that's one thing that I think is prominent throughout all of the Wachowski films, is that obviously there are different levels of interpretation, but for the average viewer that goes and sees The Matrix, they're not going to get the whole story. I mean, if you look at all the different facets of the story of The Matrix, it is quite complex. There are a lot of levels to it. V for Vendetta, not so much, although at the same time there's a great degree of continuity involved, and consequence, resulting in revolutions and all that stuff. But again, in Cloud Atlas, and I almost start to think sometimes that the Wachowskis and whoever was helping them write the scripts are deliberately making their films as obtuse and diffuse as they possibly can, in order to kind of disarm the critical faculties of the viewer, so that they basically come away with the emotional impact of the film rather than an intellectual one. So they basically identify with the main emotional theme of the film rather than try and figure it out on an intellectual level. And so I think definitely an element that's been included in all of their films in order to sort of promote the general sort of slightly new agey religion that's prominent throughout all of their films,
Yeah. Well, again, in the outside world, I'd say that's how actual revolutionaries work, is they kind of incite radical action in a large, oftentimes angry mob, and they use that to their advantage.
Yeah.
Again, I'm always wondering about the actual historical context and how one brings about revolution. Do you think that it's possible to actually spur revolutionary action through such things as film?
Yeah, I mean, it's always possible. It's just one of those things. I think it just has to be the right message conveyed in the right way by the right person in the right words at the right time to really get through to people. I think it's definitely possible, although history seems to show that most of the main revolutions haven't been so, and have been much more orchestrated and planned than history gives them credit for.
Yeah.
So, in terms of previous revolutions, I'm not so sure. In terms of the possibility of future revolutions, it's definitely a gray area. I think there are definitely possibilities there, but there's also the possibility for co-opting and subversion, and basically neutralizing whatever power any revolution might have, through, the work of, counterintelligence and through disinformation, all of that stuff,
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the Wachowskis themselves, I know that they're certainly enigmatic figures, and they try to remain out of the spotlight, although it's nearly impossible for them to do completely now.